Pat Carlini is affiliated with the National Weather Association and backed by News Center 13's exclusive AccuWeather.
Remember her? One of the first women to tell Hoosiers what was happening in the weather in central Indiana.
Good morning. It's 7:26 and 32 degrees. I'm Pat Carlini.
Pat Carlini, one of the most popular media personalities in Indy in the 90s. And not just on TV, but also as part of the hottest morning radio show in the country, posing as Betty Ford.
Mark Van Buren.
Here comes Pat. Oh my, wow.
Oh my goodness. That's a great hunk of hair.
That is a great look.
Nice.
Betty Ford had that kind of sculpted, stiff-looking
It always was the same.
hair.
Catching up with Pat Carlini, an Indiana media trailblazer, how she's transitioned from the fast-paced life in media to a much more mellow space in the world of yoga. She's my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Glad you can join us for this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Pat Carlini is an Ohio State Buckeye who got her break in TV in West Virginia. Weather was her passion, and it wound up leading her to Indianapolis in the late 80s. Pat would become what is believed to be the first woman to report on the weather in central Indiana on TV, and that was just the beginning. Pat moved on to anchor the morning show at And I am really pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by Pat Carlini, longtime radio and television personality, including here in Indianapolis, notably WTHR Channel 13, The Bob and Tom Show on Q95. Pat, I would describe you back in the day as the hardest working woman in broadcasting.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I kind of didn't know what I was doing when I got into all that, but I realized it was a lot of hours.
Well,
yes.
you were quick, steady. Hey, before we get into that, what are you up to these days? You have moved from Indianapolis. You're kind of back in your home territory because you're a native Buckeye, right?
Yeah. So I'm from Ohio. Came back a few years ago, about 3 years ago. My kids are all gone now. They're grown. They're in Austin, Texas, Chicago, working, and everybody was gone. And my mom at the time was 96 years old.
Wow.
And I thought, well, she needs a little help here and there. So I came back to Ohio, kind of helped her out. So it was a good last couple of years. We had a lot of fun. And I've got cousins all over here and sister there. They're in Canton, Akron, and Columbus. So kind of back with the whole family again.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a nice reunion of things. And I'm still here.
That's good. Yeah. So you grew up in Cleveland. Talk about growing up in Cleveland and what that was like.
Yeah, kind of Canton, Akron area, a little more. And then my dad was an executive with the power company, so we moved a lot.
Okay.
So I was all over Ohio. So we got to Portsmouth, Ohio when I was in high school, and my senior year, he got transferred again. I go, you know what? I'm done with you and all your I'm not moving anymore. So from there, it was kind of a good time to move. He went to Charleston. Now, I did go with them. That's where I got my first job, actually. So I went to Charleston and I got my first TV and radio job.
That was Charleston, West Virginia?
Charleston, West Virginia. Yeah.
Wow.
And I had to do, it was kind of scary. I had to do, you don't know back then, but they wanted me to do traffic reports, and they had a big van. And so I would drive around and do, you shouldn't be talking and driving like that. It's like, what am I doing? And I remember my dad saw me on the road one day. He's like, oh, maybe you should just go. Maybe I don't know if that's for you. But that was a good start. And then from there, I got a call from Indianapolis, and they said, we're calling you from Indianapolis. We're looking for a weather girl. And all I knew was they had a big race in Indianapolis.
Yep. Pretty big race. Yep.
I knew they had a race. So I took the job. I was the first girl, I believe, to do weather in Indy. That's how things started. And that's how Bob and Tom started making fun of me.
Okay. I want to get into that, but to back up. So you went to OHIO, right? Ohio State. Was there any other place you were going to go, or was it just a foregone conclusion that a Buckeye has got to go to Ohio State?
Yes, my dad was a huge Buckeye, and there was no other choice. You have to go to Ohio State. Yes.
Yeah. Is that where you got? When did you get the kind of the broadcasting bug, if you will?
Yeah, 'cause I was a journalism major,
Okay.
and then I would write everywhere, and then the writing got kind of like, okay, it's kind of a lot of solitude. You're by yourself, you write, and I did some radio. My friend was a DJ, and I went in with her a few times at that, but it was kind of lonely in a studio by yourself for 6 hours, and I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And then the TV stuff, and it's like, there you go. That to me looks kind of fun. You got pictures, you got people talk, and of course I talk a lot anyway. So that was kind of good. And at the time they were, like say weather girls were just becoming a thing. Everybody, there was more men doing weather than women. And so all of a sudden I got offered that. And I was like, well, I had a journalism degree, but I trained some for the weather and I started doing weather. So that's how I got the first.
So you like doing the weather, right?
Yeah. So that was really fun. Later in my years at Channel 13, it became a very serious thing. You need to be a meteorologist.
Yeah.
And not do the weather. And so they came to me and they said, look, I know you have a journalism degree. We need more meteorologists here. So how about you do the news? And I said, well, okay. And they said, be here tomorrow morning at 3 a.m. I was like, oh, crap. So I got the early morning shift in the news in Indianapolis.
Okay. Now you mentioned Bob and Tom, when you were doing the weather, they started making fun of you. What do you remember about that?
Yeah. I'm like, who are these guys? They're making fun. There's a girl doing the weather. And so they invited me. Oh, they called the station. They invited me over to the radio station and they wanted to meet me. So I said, well, okay. I didn't really know much about them. And so I drove over and I get there. They weren't there. And I said so I think the general manager, they thought I was feisty. I go, I don't have time for this. I'm new here. I've got a new job. I don't even know who these guys are. They're wasting my time. Drive over here. And so I guess that guy, the general manager, went back to Bob and Tom and said, hey, she's pretty funny. Maybe you should invite her over.
Uh-huh.
And so then they invited me back and I went over and met them. And it's like, okay, they're kind of cool. And I would do the weather on the phone at first some. And then they said, this is kind of fun. Why don't you come into the studio? It's like, well, okay. So I leave the news at the station and I drive over to the radio station. And
so you would have gotten off the air in the morning on the early news, right? Sunrise. Yeah. And then you go over there.
So like 7 a.m. I'm driving over there, put up with them for a couple hours. And then, and Channel 13 was nice. They let me play that role so that I could, as long as I was back for the noon show, that's all they cared about. So
wow.
They played around and I came back for the noon show. But so that's how, and then they're like, oh, we just would rather have you here. And then it kind of just morphed into more than just the weather. I was part of the show,
Yeah. What was, talk about what that's like. Cause that's, radio is not, people think, oh, radio, you're just sitting there talking, but it's challenging, it's a challenging job. You want to be, your timing, the way you interact with others. What was it like working with Bob and Tom? And that was back in certainly their heyday, right?
Yes. I think that definitely was. The 90s was their heyday.
Yeah.
And it is hard because like you said, timing is everything. Yeah. And that makes a big difference. But what it was interesting was like, especially Tom kind of ran everything, Bob was the funny guy along the way. But Tom didn't want to discuss anything before you go on the air. So your questions and stuff, no, you ask on the air. And I go, well, I got to ask you about how we're going to do it on the air. Okay. So nobody talked off the air. Isn't that funny? And you got on the air.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when all the goofy stuff happened because we couldn't get things straight off the air. But he didn't want it to be an organized type of thing. It's just funnier to just do it all on the air. So after a while, I would just walk in. And I thought, well, whatever happens, happens. And that's kind of how they wanted it,
Yeah. Well, describe it. We've had, or I've had on the podcast, a number of the Bob and Tom crew over the last several months on the podcast talking about things. What was that like, the atmosphere in the studio? Because they really created something that was obviously wildly popular here and that became national. What was it like in studio? What do you remember? Any in particular funny moments you remember?
Well, and it's fun because there was a few of us. So sometimes you do a radio show with just the main DJ, but there was Chick, obviously, Christy Lee. Then we had sports people coming and going, and usually a comedian guest.
Yeah.
And the comedian would try to, do their thing. And then Bob and Tom would interrupt them. And so it's kind of the just watching the whole thing was funny enough, and that you just kind of jump in when you can. And some people I think would just be really taken back by it. You have to kind of be a little crazy to be part of that show. You know? You just kind of have to play along because someone would not be able to fly with that. And that's what they wanted. They didn't want it to be for everybody,
Yeah. You mentioned being a female, doing weather, and really kind of being a trailblazer, certainly here in Indianapolis in that regard. Did that created opportunities for you, but were there challenges being a woman back then and on the air as really kind of the first female, or certainly one of the first?
Yeah. And I think you had to just be confident in your own way, because then some people didn't quite believe you. You're not a man doing the weather. How do you know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And so you had to just kind of go with it. And a few times, like we would go out and do live shots, and there was a guy that always harassed people, especially Channel 13. He was always showing up and he would harass doing live shots. He would always be in the background bugging people. So they warned me about him. So finally I was out there and I saw him and I met him and I said, let me just talk to you for a minute. I'll let you say what you want to say on camera. And he goes, why? That never happened before. And so I said, now you leave me alone for a minute. So I do my weather cast. It's 3 minutes, and I'll put you on camera. You say whatever you want. Okay. And he was quiet for my whole 3 minutes. And afterwards, I let him talk on camera. Now, we never aired it, but
sure,
he knows, And so it was just funny because it's like, I think I was since I was new and I didn't know anybody, I was a trailblazer in some ways, not even knowing it.
Yeah.
Got along with everybody, and they would always go, send her out because, we have no trouble. We send you out doing a live shot, it goes well. And so
we'll talk about, because you were extremely popular on both TV and then the role with Bob and Tom. What was that like, being recognized out in public and that kind of that fame portion of the being on TV?
Well, I think it does kind of happen quickly. You don't really realize it sometimes, but I remember one thing that stood out in my mind was it was race time, and in the newspaper there was the beginning of the race month. The month of May used to be the whole month of May.
Right.
And it was a big deal. And I was there. And anyways, I was at the track, and the guy took my picture of the reporter, and I was walking by the stands, and the front page of the paper said, "Look who's at the track, Pat Carlini." And I was like, wow, there, all those drivers, all those people. He took my picture and I'm at the track, and that was his story.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes things, you don't even realize it at the time, and all of a sudden I thought, but I was new there and something different. And maybe since I didn't try so hard, now I didn't really think about trying to be a packer, then it kind of happens for you. Then that's probably good advice to give somebody. It's like, you go into it trying to think you're going to be all that, it probably won't happen. If you're blindly into it.
Yeah. Now I read it at some point, because 13 got a relationship with WFMS, and did they want you to kind of give up the Bob and Tom thing? How did that go?
Yeah, that got kind of rough in the early 2000s, and they were with FMS. And they didn't want me to do the Bob and Tom. And everybody was like, well, how do you take her off the Bob and Tom show? That was
right.
Thing at that point. So it got kind of, and that one, we had a new news director at 13, and won't say his name out loud, but he never liked me and I didn't like him. But that's okay. So he was the one, he did not like the Bob and Tom show. He did not like any of that. So eventually I had to slide out carefully. And that was really hard.
Was it hard? How did you handle that? How was that handled?
Well, it was, the timing was, I was having a baby boy in 2000. So I was leaving work some anyway. So it was kind of a time to go, So I left work, was off, for like 6 weeks or so. And I just didn't go back on Bob and Tom show. And they were kind of like, well, let's just not talk about that much. Let's just let it go. Had a baby. Let's just say you know what I mean? So they didn't want to go on about it. They didn't want to make a deal about it. And a couple times, couple of magazines and stuff, people start asking questions, and they were always good. They didn't talk about it much. They just said, yeah, she's got other things to do. She can't be on the show right now. And they never said exactly why. But I kind of always felt bad about that, because 13, for being on the show that long, they should have just let me do my thing. I still like it. And
yeah. What made Bob and Tom, the Bob and Tom show, in your view, so successful, so special, iconic, really in this market, certainly, and then growing around the country? What made the show special?
Well, they really were not afraid to say, that when I've worked at other radio stations before that, and there's all these little stipulations, you don't want to say this, you can't insult that group, and you can't, they didn't care about any of it. So they would insult people, they would say what they want, and that takes a lot of nerve, and it might offend some people along the way, but it also attracts I remember people saying, I would even be driving there and people had their radio on. People, had to listen to them because you didn't know what they're going to do. So there was not all those they didn't play by the rules at all. And sometimes, maybe for some it doesn't work, but for them it worked and they became a thing. And they also kind of got in with, the Howard Stern was a big deal then. And people wanted them to compete with Howard Stern and come into New York. And they go, you know what, we don't want to play that game. We want to, they went national in the mid 90s, but it was every place else. And they ignored Howard Stern. So Howard Stern was talking about them making fun and they ignored him. And I thought, that takes a lot to do that. They had a the good way they handled it was, we're not going to play that game. We don't need him. And they just went without him. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Which did you like better, radio or TV? Or did you have a favorite between the two?
Well, I kind of always liked my TV. Actually, the TV weather is really one of my favorites. Isn't that funny? But you're by yourself doing your own thing. You have to be able to chit chat because you got 3-4 minutes by yourself. There's no monitor. There's no script. You just have to be able to chit chat. And so I kind of always like that. News got a little more strict. You got to follow the script and
right.
break and all that. And then radio is, you don't see any of that. Radio is just voices, So that, to me, there was always I liked the full, I think I liked the weather and the full picture.
Yeah.
My favorite. But certainly if you have to do radio, doing the Bob and Tom show was the highlight of my career.
Great to do it. Yeah. We have a connection, Pat, believe it or not. When I was at Indiana State, I did the weekend weather at Channel 2 in Terre Haute. WTWO. I did the weekend weather. And, it was the best experience. I interviewed for like a part-time report. I was still in college. And the guy said, well, we've already filled that, but what do you know about weather? And I said, well, a lot. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, I got that gig on the weekends and it was great because as you know, like you said, you're out there chatting, it's an ad lib for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is about what's going on. So it was a great experience, but we have a weather bond. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. That too. That's great. There's something about it that's really kind of fun and keeps you going. I remember I had a job interview in Detroit, and it was for a weather job. They flew me up, and I sat down with this guy. And this guy he was a classic. He had the Weather Channel on the whole time we're talking. And this girl came on, and he goes, "Oh, man, look at her. She's hot." And I was like, this is not somebody that I really want to work for. So I think it's interesting how you learn as you go. Some people just say anything, and that whole TV business, there's some crazies out there.
Oh, there are. Yeah, interesting people for sure. We have much more ahead with Pat Carlini. We'll talk more about, some celebrity interviews she had done while in Indianapolis, juggling Sunrise, the Bob and Tom show, and a lot more. That's when the Business and Beyond podcast returns.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, Pat Carlini, longtime radio and television personality here in Indianapolis, Channel 13, the Bob and Tom show. And one of the things that we touched on in the first half of the podcast, but how did you juggle? You're doing Sunrise, going to Bob and Tom, then back to Channel 13 for the noon show. you said you're having fun with radio, but still you got to be on. You've got to be on from the time you're on sunrise all the way through the morning. That had to be a pretty challenging work schedule.
It was a lot. And I remember, through the 90s doing all that. And I remember I went to my chiropractor friend one time, and he was working he goes, really, your neck, your back's a mess. You do a lot in a day. And I was like, wow, yeah, but you kind of just at the time, you kind of play along, you don't know. And then I started having children, and then it does kind of start to catch up with you. It's like, okay, it's getting to be a lot, but it was just enjoyable, and I just had fun with it.
Yeah. Now you did the weather. You did celebrity interviews too, didn't you?
Yeah. That was always fun. I got to do some fun, concerts would come to town, and it
was that for 13 or for Q95?
Mostly 13, I think.
13, okay.
You out there doing the weather or a news story anyway. So it's like, hey, if you can get an interview,
Yeah.
Of course, I had a couple of favorites of my own. Rob Thomas. I'm a big fan of Rob Thomas. So
okay.
I fainted when I did that interview. And then I always loved Paul McCartney, and I got to meet him.
Oh, wow.
That was fabulous. Yeah. And he was just Paul McCartney. It's so funny because sometimes you meet somebody, they're not at all what you think. Actually, Bob and Tom would always tell me that. They go, if you admire somebody and you're a big fan, it's best not to meet them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I go, that's something. And then, and Brad Garrett. Remember Brad Garrett?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So he was on the Bob and Tom show quite a bit. So they were so funny. They wanted me to go on a date with Brad Garrett. And Brad Garrett's like 8 foot tall. I'm 5 foot tall. It was really weird. But he wanted to see the circus was in town. So I said, okay. So Brad and I went to the circus, and we were right in the front row and everything. And the circus guys saw him and stuff. And they said, hey, the clown said, come on down with us, do this little thing. I said, go, you should do it. You're here one night. And so he runs down on the court, and he's down there on the circus thing. And the clowns start doing all this stuff, and they hit him in the head with this like rubber ball, knocked him out cold.
You are kidding.
Brad Garrett out cold on the floor. And I'm like, what do I do with this guy? He's 8 foot tall. I can't even drag him myself. So they had to get him out, and I told Bob and Tom, I go, don't do that to me anymore, ever again. And he was all apologizing. But of course, people thought it was hilarious, but he actually was knocked out.
Knocked out. Wow. Who would you say, because I know Mellencamp, you did a lot of interviews. Was there one or two favorites, or one or two funny stories, or maybe somebody you didn't like that you interviewed on the celebrity side?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Not so much that. Mellencamp he's his own thing. He just does his own. Yeah. And I was at his house with him and his studio and his wife at the time. And I could see him being, a difficult person to live with, but it's John Mellencamp. So I had fun. I could say, and Rob Thomas was just one of those that I always liked him anyway. And he was exactly the same as he is on stage. So some people are just really honestly them, and some people I think put on a great show and they go out and they get home and they're not that person at all. But yeah, luckily I've had some good luck with my interviews.
In terms of through your broadcasting career in particular, did you have mentors or people who you, kind of leaned on, or who helped you through your career?
Yeah. And that's kind of interesting, because I think I was kind of blindly going into it. I knew when I was in Charleston, West Virginia, I had some help with this and that. I had a news anchor guy that I worked with was always a big help about doing the news and so forth. But when I got to Indy, I was just I didn't know anybody. It was a free spirit, and I just was kind of on my own. And maybe that's a good way to do it too, because I didn't know any better.
Yeah. Yeah. You're still involved in kind of some media related things now, right?
Yeah, and I've done a few things here. I'm in Columbus. I met the people at the 614 magazine, so their articles are fun. So I thought if I could write some articles for them, but kind of on the side, my girls always loved yoga. I was always a dancer, and so I went to this yoga class with this friend that I met, and I was like, well, this is kind of nice. And so I ended up going back, and now I'm a official yoga instructor.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. After a year of studying yoga. So now I do some classes here, and it's a whole nother thing, it's a whole nother world. But I have a good time with the people. that come in and we chit chat. And so I never had a problem with that, because the hardest thing is for some instructors, it's like, now you got to talk to the people, and that's my easy part. So I have a good time with them, and then I hope they enjoy the yoga.
Yeah. What was the transition like out of media into that next chapter, if you will? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's kind of tough. At the time, like I say, I had young children, so I think if there's something that takes your mind off of it, if you were just by yourself, and if I had to go ahead and leave or something, I think it'd be people are kind of nice, because it does become your life. You know, it's your whole thing. And so people that leave it have a real hard time. But I had kind of another whole thing I was dealing with at that age. So that kind of helped me transform. And then, like I say, then all of a sudden they're all grown up and gone. You're like, well, now, geez, what am I going to do that? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, what's next, Pat? What seem like you're very happy there in Columbus, close to family, those types of things. Do you have a next thing you're looking to do?
Well, I always have to go back the TV route. So now that I'm a yoga instructor, I really want to do some yoga on TV. A show, a studio, or something. I can't leave it alone.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Have you had any conversations with anyone over there?
Well, yeah, met a few that have. There's a beautiful studio downtown. I'm right downtown, which is kind of crazy. And there's a beautiful studio nearby that I would love to take over, but I'm trying to first get my clientele all worked up and stuff. So I got a little bit more work to do. And then the TV stations, the local NBC people here that I've met, doing a little thing with them would be great. But for somehow, some things always go back to some TV.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know how that happens, but yeah.
Full circle. That is great. Well, good luck with that, Pat. It's really been great to catch up with you. You're such an icon in the market here for a number of years, and glad that everything is going well for you in Ohio. And if you're ever back this way, hope you stop in and say hello.
Yes, and you've been at it a long time yourself, so congratulations to you. Yes, and I would love to see you in person when I come in town.
Likewise. Pat Carlini, longtime radio and television personality, continuing to do great things. Pat, thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you.
All right, and thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, where a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. We're presented by PNC, and you can catch all episodes, more than 175, and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.